So let me ask, some people were not here before. Let me ask you all to raise your hand if you have ever held a little baby in your arms. Have you ever held a little baby? So toddlers, when they start to grow up, are just as delicate, just as precious as little babies. And then bigger kids can move around and get hurt, and we have to protect them. But I was just reading about a boy who was probably 12 when we made him a captive of our nation and began to hold him. Not the way you hold a baby, but the way that we as a people now hold individuals. We put a hood on him. We stripped him, we shackled him, we shoved him downstairs. We brought him to Guantanamo, kicked him, beat him, broke his nose, pepper sprayed him, and deprived him of sleep for many days. In 2003, he tried to kill himself by slamming his head against a wall. This boy, like most of the people in Guantanamo, is not even accused of being an evildoer or an international terrorist. He is accused of fighting back against the illegal occupation of his country, and that is proved by evidence obtained through torture. So our plan, the plan of the United States of America, is to hold him forever without trial, without charge, because all of the evidence came from torture. He's now about 19, having spent his teenage years in a death camp, in a place where you only get out by dying. And our plan, our president's plan, is to move him to a different death camp so that we can close. Our plan is to send this kid to a different death camp so that we can close the one that we all want to close and have him in a different one where his captors will do an annual review that they will grotesquely refer to as due process. And that is what we will be as a nation. We will hold people outside the rule of law. We will let those who have tortured in the past know that they will not be prosecuted. Either one of those guarantees that the torture goes on. And so this kid is in prison in a death camp, and those who tortured him, those who facilitated the torture, those who ordered the torture, those who created the entire torture program are not being prosecuted. It's not even on the table, as they call it, yet. And that's what we're here about today. That's why I want to welcome all of you to Torture Accountability Action Day. And I want to bring up our first speaker. We are very privileged, very honored to have with us many representatives of Amnesty International. That's right. And the director of Counter-Terror with Justice.
I have a few remarks. I want to, Amnesty International is a human rights organization. We have about approximately 2.2 million members worldwide. And one of our main priorities is our campaign called Counter-Terror with Justice, focusing on human rights abuses that have happened during the war on terror. And so I've been asked to start the discussion that we're having today collectively on accountability by giving a little background and really talking about why Amnesty International has been campaigning on this work and continues to campaign on this work. So in the name of countering terrorism, the United States has violated the rights of many individuals in Iraq, Afghanistan, Guantanamo, and elsewhere. The human rights violations committed by and on behalf of the United States since September 11 are many and varied. This has been confirmed by documents, photographs, declassified legal opinion, and official statements. These violations have included enforced disappearances, torture, cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, and in some instances, these have led to the deaths of people in custody. There have been prolonged detention, other forms of arbitrary and indefinite detention, secret transfers of detainees between countries, and violations of the rights of detainees to a fair trial and counsel.
Several top U.S. military officials have recently said that the two largest recruiting tools that endanger our troops in Iraq are Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib. Because when people see the picture of that torture and that abuse, that causes even more resentment and hatred against the United States. But torture and cruel treatment are not just ill-advised and not just immoral, they're also illegal. 3 treaties that the United States has ratified and several federal statutes prohibit torture. In fact, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading treatment or punishment says that no exceptional circumstances whatsoever, including a state of war, can ever be used as a justification for torture. That means that even if Dick Cheney, who's on the road now talking about how torture worked, even though that appears to conflict with the facts, even if that was true, it would still be illegal. And it's not true, because experts continually say that people will say anything to get the torture to stop. The Constitution requires that the President take care that the laws be faithfully enforced. That means it's President Obama and Attorney General Holder's constitutional duty to investigate and prosecute people for torture. And there is very, very strong evidence in the form of memos that continue to come out, testimony, and photographs that make it very clear that Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and Rice and Gonzalez and Tenet were part of a concerted effort, along with their legal mercenaries, John Yoo, Jay Bybee, William Haynes, Stephen Bradbury, and many others who twisted the law of torture and came up with basically invented defenses so that the Bush officials who authorized the torture and abuse would not be prosecuted, would be immunized. They should all be investigated and prosecuted.
Brothers, I'm glad to see everyone who's come out here today to stand for the truth, to stand in defense of fundamental rights and human rights and civil liberties. And I'm disappointed to see more than 10 police vehicles surrounding the square we're standing on. Why are they here? Why are the police here? They're here to listen to courageous torture survivors tell their stories. They're here to listen to legal advocates stand up for human rights. Why are the police standing here? What is it that they're so afraid of? What are they protecting? What should they be doing? Well, what they should be doing is demanding an extradition request from Texas. They should be demanding an extradition request to have George Bush brought to Washington, D.C., indicted, put on trial. But instead, they're standing here listening to people who want nothing more than basic justice.
We decided to file VelvetRevolution.us and VotersForPeace.us, along with 150 other groups, decided to file complaints against the Bush-Cheney torture lawyers because Washington, D.C. is not handling this issue. Washington, D.C. isn't clamped down when it comes to torture. They just can't face up to it. There's too much complicity. Congress was briefed 40 times on torture. Mostly remained silent. Whenever there was a threat of them coming out, Dick Cheney would show up and scare them away from speaking out, so they stayed silent. Attorney General Holder, when he was in the Clinton administration, approved renditions to send people to other countries to be tortured. So he's complicit. The Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel has been sitting for 5 years on a memo on whether or not Jay Bybee and John Yoo should be disbarred. They can't come to a conclusion on it. And now President Obama hiding the evidence of a widespread torture program so Americans can be fooled into thinking this just happened in Guantanamo, this just happened in Abu Ghraib. In fact, this was a widespread torture program affecting thousands of people at dozens of bases in Afghanistan, Iraq, Cuba, and around the world. And those photos would have shown that. Now, when I practiced law, when my opponent would not be open in discovery, when they would hide the evidence, I knew I had a winning case. And that's the situation here. They're hiding the evidence because they know they're wrong.